everyone. Yeah, I know I'm the last one, so hopefully I won't take too much of your time, and you can all get to your receptions afterwards. But yeah, as she said, I'm Alan from Breakthrough T1D. We used to be known as JDRF. We're a nonprofit foundation that funds basic and clinical research in type 1 diabetes. So I'm sure everybody's generally a little bit familiar with type 1, so I won't spend too much time on this, but I know type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. It leads to the selective destruction of the insulin-producing cells in your pancreas. And as that beta cell mass declines, eventually the pancreas loses its ability to produce insulin, and that results in a lifelong dependency on exogenous insulin. We recently changed our name. We used to be known as JDRF, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and we changed it last year to Breakthrough T1D primarily because we wanted to kind of inform everybody and kind of really drive home the point that it's not a juvenile disease. A lot of adults are diagnosed with it. It's also a lifelong disease, and actually, 40% of new diagnoses are now in adults, and a lot of adults who are actual T1D patients are often misdiagnosed in adulthood as type 2 diabetics. And so it's the number of patients getting diagnosed with type 1 diabetes is increasing every year. Right now it's estimated that about 537 million people in the world have it. That number is increasing dramatically. I think there's also a misconception that type 1 diabetes is basically a cured disease. But in fact, the burden for patients living with type 1 is very high, and it's often very difficult to manage. The average type 1 patient spends a good majority of their time not within range of normal glycemic levels, and that can lead to dangerous conditions like diabetic ketoacidosis, but also these kind of periods of hyper and hypoglycemia lead to downstream comorbidities like cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, and diabetic retinopathy. So who we are and kind of what role we play in type 1 diabetes. We're the largest public nonprofit funder of T1D research. Right now we have over 450 active projects in all 23 countries. We're an international organization. Last year we gave out about $140 million in grants, and one of the kind of great things that we take a lot of pride in is that we give out our own research grants, but we also work really hard to partner with other agencies, other nonprofits, as well as NDC partners and government agencies to draw in additional funding. And so, last year we drew in over $450 million of research money towards type 1 diabetes, and that those monies are, goes towards both basic and clinical research. We actively fund clinical trials. Right now we have 79 active trials around the world. And I know this is a non-dilutive funding summit, but we do also have a venture philanthropy arm known as the T1D Fund that does traditional equity investments, if that is something that someone in the group is interested in. So we really kind of see ourselves as an accelerator as well as a funding source. So obviously we provide funding for discovery as well as development of therapies, but also our foundation has a lot of experts who work actively in the regulatory capacity, in advocacy, as well as patient communication and patient community kind of organization. So we are really able to help drive therapies all throughout this pipeline beyond just this initial funding to get the research off the ground. So I wanted to kind of touch on the areas that we tend to fund. So they're kind of split into three main categories. The first one we call kind of cures. So basically these are therapies that are meant to kind of replace the insulin production that people currently are receiving endogenously. And the thought is that we can provide an internal source of insulin to basically remove the kind of burdens that come with living with type 1 diabetes. So the main kind of thrust for this right now is stem cell derived islets and beta cell replacement therapies, but we're also really interested in beta cell regeneration and other types of therapies that can kind of replace what's already been lost. We also work on therapies that we kind of categorize as disease-modifying or delaying therapies. And so a lot of these are kind of immunotherapy-based or small molecule-based, things that basically prevent or halt the destruction of the beta cells that lead to type 1 diabetes. There's also been a lot of work dedicated towards improved screening and early detection. There's a lot of evidence that the earlier you catch type 1 diabetes or the presence of things like autoantibodies, the better it is for long-term outcomes. So, there are a lot of additional kind of interests that we're able to fund that might fall outside of what you originally consider a type 1 diabetes therapy. And then our last bucket is called improving lives. So these things that fall into this bucket are basically drugs, devices, and therapies that help improve the lives of people who are already living with established type 1. So, this is kind of, I think, what most people kind of think of when they think about type 1 diabetes research, things like insulin, pumps, continuous glucose monitors. But we also invest in companies that work on behavioral interventions, things that kind of reduce the social burden, the kind of mental strain and kind of difficulties that a lot of type 1 patients have. And then we also invest in therapies that impact comorbidities for type 1 diabetic patients, so things like cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, and diabetic retinopathy. So there are multiple ways we interact with companies, and we are able to fund them. The main one is called the Industry Discovery and Development Partnership Program, IDDP. And I welcome you guys to go to our website and look through our grant handbook to read through kind of the criteria and things like that. And then the slides, I believe, are available on, that will be distributed to everybody later as well. But basically, the aim of this program is for us to engage companies, for-profit entities, and basically accelerate the development of therapies and devices for type 1. And so the eligibility criteria is very broad. Basically, anyone from large pharma all the way to very small startups that are getting off the ground are eligible. And the kind of way that the partnership can be structured is also very flexible. It can be in partnership with academic investigators. We also have a large network of CROs with a lot of T1D expertise that we can connect you with. And then the only kind of main stipulation we require for participants in this IDDP program is that there are matching resources. So essentially, us as a foundation, we fund projects and not companies. So if we determine that, like, together that a budget for a project is $1 million or $3 million, however much, we would expect half of that to come from you and half of that to come from us. And what exactly that counts towards those matching resources is something we can discuss, and we're fairly flexible in that area as well. We don't want that to be an obstacle for partnership, for sure. The really kind of key thing we consider when deciding whether or not to fund a proposal is whether or not it aligns with the general strategy that we have, kind of that cures, delay, and improving lives buckets that I had described earlier. And I welcome everybody to go to our website and really thoroughly read our research strategy documents. It really outlines kind of the areas we've been particularly focused in. But the proposals that we ask for you basically just require an idea of the project that you're proposing and how that might impact type 1 diabetics or their complications down the line. And then it's always great for there to be a strong development path towards commercialization. And we can always help as well with our expertise in-house about regulatory considerations and things like that. So I wanted to quickly go through what our application and review process looks like. So it's fairly flexible. The first kind of initial step is to establish contact with one of the scientists. So my contact information is at the end of this deck, so you're welcome to use me as your initial kind of foot through the door. But basically what we ask is just for a non-confidential deck and a short kind of summary of what you're proposing, and that can be sent to us. And basically what happens then is, we'll talk it over, and I'm happy to give feedback as to whether or not this aligns with our strategy. And the reason why we want this initial kind of point of contact to be pretty informal is that we want it to be not too much of a waste of your time in case it's something that really falls outside of our purview. But if it is something that we are interested in, we can advance you to the next stage. Basically, it's a more formal letter of intent. This is somewhere in like a 3 to 4 page document that's submitted kind of directly into our grant management system. And then it's also automatically shared with the T1D fund, which is our venture philanthropy arm that does equity investments. And you're basically asked to provide basic things about the project again, but also company financials and information about the structure of your company. Again, if the review of the LOI is positive and there's still mutual interest in both, both on our side and on yours, we'll ask you to submit a full application. And that's when we'll get into kind of the terms of the agreement and just a more fleshed out outlining of things like milestones and the project being proposed. Once we receive that, that gets sent out for external peer review. We have, a large network of experts in the field that will look over the project and come up with any, suggestions and a score. And if the scores are great, then it's wonderful. It basically moves right on. But if not, you do have a period that you're able to do rebuttals and answer any kind of questions or issues that the reviewers might have brought up. And then after that, the legal teams come together and flesh out a final term sheet, and you're funded. I would say that the average time span for this for most companies is somewhere in the 5 to 6 month range. I don't want to go through all of these, but basically we have kind of set contract conditions for the majority of our partnerships with companies, but these things are always negotiable, so definitely feel free to talk to us about it. And a lot of these come because we are a nonprofit foundation using donor funds to sponsor a for-profit venture, and so there are certain things that we do require for funding. The one that I always like to share in advance so that everybody is aware is that we do ask for a royalty payment upon commercialization of whatever asset or product we funded. The terms for this are always negotiable, and there is a cap of the royalty to a certain X of the amount. So usually it's fairly inconsequential at the end of the day. So for example, if the grant that we gave you was $1 million, after you've paid us, after the product is commercialized, and we get a royalty payment up to $2 million, that royalty goes away and basically it's no longer there. The other area that I do want to highlight is that our grants are all milestone based, pretty standard. You do get a tranche of money at the beginning, and then the rest are paid upon milestones that are agreed upon at the initiation of the partnership. And happy to kind of talk about this more with anybody who's interested, but there's also more details on our website about these general requirements. So yeah, I wanted to give an example of a partnership that we felt was very successful and we kind of ushered throughout the entire life cycle of therapy. So Protomer Technologies was a company that was developing a gradual release insulin, and we actually funded the graduate student who came up with it when he was still doing his PhD. And the technology was really impressive, and so once he graduated, we worked with other partners to basically help him form a company using our IDDP program and funded kind of this initial development stage for this GRI. And once it got through the certain kind of early clinical stages, development, we were able to fund him again for a larger IDDP, and that helped push the development of this GRI to the point where it was ready for outside equity investment, and that was led by Eli Lilly, along with our venture philanthropy arm, the T1D fund. And that, after another year of kind of development, Lilly ended up acquiring Protomer in $1 billion deal. So we really see this as kind of one of our strengths, being able to take something kind of from the very beginning and using both our network as well as our resources to kind of push it into a place where it can reach patients. And I know that what I always get when I talk to people about Breakthrough and kind of what we fund, people tend to have a very limited view of what it is that they think we'd be interested in. And my advice to you is we're interested in a lot more things than you think. So it never hurts to just shoot me an email and kind of talk about it. But here is just a quick snapshot of some other companies that we funded that had major milestones in the last year or two. For example, Sigilon Therapeutics, they were a biomaterials company. They developed basically immune invasive or kind of immune invisible biomaterials that they were using for cell encapsulation therapies. And we funded kind of the initial development of their IP, but then also funded them when they decided to spin out of a university and become a company. And they were eventually acquired by Eli Lilly last year. Prevention Bio, they are the makers of Tzield, which is the first therapy approved for delaying the onset of type 1 diabetes. And we, again, funded that initial kind of IP development, and they were acquired by Sanofi last year as well. And, it's not always acquisitions. We're also very proud of when we're able to kind of help build partnerships with larger pharma companies for these smaller companies. So Aspect Biosystems, for example, was a 3D bioprinting company that we had invested in and given some funding to. And they were able to enter a strategic partnership with Novo to work on some of their technology they had developed in partnership with us. In VTV Therapeutics, they are a company that was working on a small molecule, and we were able to fund multiple clinical trials with them, and we were also able to participate and help build their syndicate for one of their most recent rounds. And then similarly with Zucara, they're also an active part of our portfolio right now, and we've been able to support both their preclinical drug development as well as their most recent phase 2 study. So really the kind of breadth of our investments is a lot wider than a lot of people think, and so very happy to talk to people about their ideas. So yeah, that's basically all I have. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or are interested in any of our programs. There are other ways we can partner beyond the IDDP program, but that is the main way we work with companies, but always happy to work with people on a one-on-one basis. So yeah, happy to take any questions. Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of active companies in our portfolio. We don't consider grants on a fixed time basis, so it really kind of depends. So basically, anytime someone's interested in working with us, we can consider them for funding. We have general calls that they can qualify for, but we consider them throughout the year. I would say that we probably have about I would say maybe like 30 or 40 active companies right now, but it's always kind of changing because sometimes a grant ends and then they go off and do a little bit more development and then come back for additional funding, so it can really fluctuate.
Someone else has a question. I have one more. Do you create synergy and collaboration among your companies with the fund? Because sometimes we can really be complementary and accelerate each other's progress from sharing clinical trial participants, all the aspects of
Yeah, definitely. It's a real benefit of having, being part of the Breakthrough T1D network is you have access to a lot of, KOLs as well as other companies working on similar technologies, and then also access to very precious things like samples from previous clinical trials and things like that. And so, yeah, we're always very happy to try to facilitate those types of collaborations. Yeah.
So we are currently funded by the IHD for minority diabetic study. Type 2, your countries has been your push on these things parts. Non-Dilutive has had a huge factor in reduce cardiovascular death, particularly very often in diabetes patients. In your example, it seems like very hardcore bioscience. I have not seen. I see my program fit into your improvement, like the middle one, right? I don't see your example have any sort of representation of these more
Yeah, we definitely fund programs like yours or programs like that under our psychosocial initiatives. I'll say that it's usually less quantifiable, and that's why it's harder. It's just less flashy on a slide, and that's just why it's not on there. But we definitely love working with people who are doing these types of initiatives, and definitely something we're happy to consider. And honestly, it's an area that we're really trying to build more actively in, because it's definitely a huge, there's definitely a large desire within our patient population wanting those types of initiatives. So, yeah. Thank you.